Jean Hackman's daughter has finally spoken out, and what she revealed is absolutely shocking. For years, the Hollywood icon lived in near total privacy, but after his unexpected and tragic passing, the truth is now coming to light. It's not typical to find two people deceased in a home, and then there was also a dog in a kennel found dead. What was he hiding? And why did his daughter wait until now to speak out? The answers are bound to leave you stunned. This isn't just another Hollywood mystery, it's something far more unsettling. What she revealed about her father will change everything you thought you knew about Jean Hackman. Stay with us because the truth behind his final days is truly disturbing. Jean Hackman's legacy was never about seeking the spotlight. He didn't need to. His on-screen presence said it all. From his breakout role in Bonnie and Clyde to his unforgettable performances in The French Connection and Unforgiven, Hackman had a way of commanding attention without ever trying. He wasn't flashy or polished. He was real. His performances felt effortless, even when you knew they weren't. For decades, he ruled Hollywood, but never let Hollywood control him. While many actors clung to their careers, taking roles just to remain relevant, Hackman made a rare and bold decision. He retired, just like that. No dramatic exit, no farewell tour, no endless interviews reflecting on his past successes. He simply disappeared from the industry in 2004, leaving behind a body of work that most actors could only dream of. And he never looked back. Hackman's decision to retire was an unusual one, especially for an actor of his caliber. He'd won 2 Academy Awards, starred in some of the most iconic films of his time, and was considered one of the greatest actors to ever live. But for Hackman, there was nothing more to prove. After decades in the spotlight, when it was time to step away, he did so on his own terms. His absence only fueled curiosity. Every few years, a blurry photo would surface of him in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where he had chosen to live in peace, away from the Hollywood hustle. Jean Hackman enjoyed a quiet life with his wife, Betsy Arakawa. He wasn't attending film festivals, making surprise appearances at award shows, or sitting down for tell-all interviews about his career. The man who once portrayed some of the most intense, larger-than-life characters on screen had chosen a life of complete privacy. Every now and then, his name would come up in discussions about Hollywood legends, but there was little to say beyond what was already known. No scandals, no feuds, no dramatic downfalls. Just a man who had done the work, reaped the rewards, and left when he was ready. But even the most private lives can't stay a mystery forever. When news of Hackman's passing broke, it was almost surreal. He had been out of the public eye for so long that people had almost forgotten he was still around. Having outlived many of his peers, there was an air of permanence about him, a kind of actor who seemed untouchable. Yet suddenly he was gone, and not just him, but his wife as well. The circumstances of their deaths were immediately unusual, a seemingly peaceful life upended by something no one expected. Details were scarce, and the initial reports raised more questions than answers. But one thing was clear: Jean Hackman's story wasn't over yet. What happened inside that house? What was the real story behind his final years? And what shocking revelations did his daughter finally share about her father? The truth was just beginning to come to light. Despite spending decades in the spotlight, Hackman never seemed entirely comfortable with fame. He was never one to bask in the glow of celebrity or seek attention. Even at the peak of his career, when his name was tied to Oscar-winning films and box office hits, Hackman remained distant, not cold or unfriendly, but separate. It was as if he had one foot in the industry and the other in a place only he truly understood. Unlike many of his peers, Hackman didn't craft a public persona beyond his work. He didn't make appearances on late-night talk shows unless absolutely necessary, and he wasn't one for in-depth interviews. He just preferred to stay out of the limelight. Jean Hackman was never one to flaunt a big smile at every industry event. When he did attend, there was always a sense of reserve about him, as if, even in a crowded room, part of him was somewhere else. Maybe that's why his decision to retire didn't come as a complete surprise. Hollywood had never truly felt like home to him. He wasn't interested in becoming the aging legend popping up in cameos for the sake of nostalgia. He wasn't sticking around hoping for a career revival. He simply walked away, and once he did, it felt like he had disappeared. For the next 2 decades, Hackman became almost mythical in his absence. Unlike other retired actors who occasionally reappear for tributes or Lifetime Achievement Awards, Hackman made it clear he was done. No guest appearances, no public statements, no return to the spotlight. Even when fans begged for it, he made his choice and stuck to it. The only glimpses the world got of him were rare. A fan might capture a blurry photo of him at a diner in New Mexico, or a paparazzi shot might surface of him riding his bike. But beyond that, there was nothing. He had built a life completely removed from Hollywood, fiercely guarding his privacy. This separation went beyond his career. Even those who worked closely with him spoke about him in ways that suggested they didn't know much about the man behind the roles. Directors praised his performances but rarely called him a friend. Co-stars admired his talent, but admitted he kept to himself. He was professional, committed, and incredibly skilled, but always just out of reach. Even his personal life remained largely a mystery. His first marriage to Faye Maltese lasted 30 years before ending in divorce. His second marriage to Betsy Arakawa, a woman 30 years his junior, was equally private. There were no tabloid scandals or messy public disputes, just a quiet, guarded life. While this might seem unusual for someone who had once been one of the biggest stars in the world, it made perfect sense to Hackman. He never needed the spotlight, never sought validation. He had always been someone who did things his own way, even if it meant shutting the world out entirely. But no matter how much distance he put between himself and Hollywood, people never stopped wondering why Jean Hackman chose to disappear so completely. What was life like behind the walls of his Santa Fe home? And perhaps most importantly, what had he been hiding all these years? The tragic discovery came after years of Hackman living in near-total obscurity. No red carpets, no press appearances, no public statements. Just the quiet life he had chosen with his wife, Betsy Arakawa, in Santa Fe, New Mexico. When people spoke of him, it was often in passing, mentioning his legendary career, his sudden retirement, or the rare sightings that would occasionally surface. But on February 26, 2025, his name returned to the headlines for a far more devastating reason. Jean Hackman and Betsy Arakawa were found dead in their home. The news sent shockwaves through Hollywood, as well as through the countless fans who had admired him from afar. At 94 years old, Hackman had lived so long outside the public eye that his death felt almost surreal. Some assumed he had simply passed away due to old age, like many legends before him. But something about this case didn't sit right. The details were scarce at first. No obvious signs of foul play, no immediate cause of death listed. Just the grim reality that one of Hollywood's most beloved actors, along with his wife, was gone. Questions began swirling almost instantly. What had happened inside that house? Why had they both died at the same time? And why did it feel like there was more to the story than anyone was telling? Authorities arrived at their home that morning after a wellness check was requested. When they entered, they found the couple unresponsive. Paramedics confirmed what many had feared. There was nothing they could do. What should have been just another peaceful day in the quiet life Hackman had built turned into a tragic scene. Early reports suggested that carbon monoxide poisoning could have been involved. Carbon monoxide has caused countless accidental deaths over the years, often without warning. If there had been a leak, neither Hackman nor his wife would have known until it was too late. But there was one problem. Officials found no immediate signs of a gas leak or malfunctioning furnace. The broken heating system didn't offer a clear explanation for why both of them had died at the same time. While the possibility of toxic exposure remained on the table, the lack of solid evidence left investigators searching for answers. As news of the tragedy spread, reactions poured in from those who had known Hackman throughout his career. Former co-stars, directors, and industry insiders shared memories of working with him, many highlighting his unparalleled talent, dedication to his craft, and his decision to leave Hollywood behind. Others reflected on his famously private nature, acknowledging that even in death, there was an air of mystery surrounding him. However, the most surprising reaction came from within Hackman's own family. His daughter, Elizabeth Jean Hackman, spoke out about the tragedy, revealing something few had expected. She hadn't spoken to her father in months. This revelation only raised more questions. Why had they lost touch? Was there tension in their relationship? And most importantly, did she know something the rest of the world didn't? As the investigation continued and speculation grew, the world had lost a legend, but the full story of what had happened inside that house was still unfolding. The truth, it turned out, was far from simple. Jean Hackman was known for keeping to himself, and this extended beyond his Hollywood life. While his performances left a lasting impact on audiences, his personal life remained mostly out of the public eye. Even those who worked closely with him admitted that they never truly knew him. When it came to his family, the same pattern held true. Hackman had 3 children from his first marriage to Faye Maltese, but if you looked through his interviews, you'd rarely find him talking about them. Unlike many other Hollywood figures who often spoke about their children in the press, Hackman kept those relationships private. As his career took off and his fame grew, the distance between him and his kids became more apparent. His daughter, Elizabeth Jean Hackman, was no exception. While the world saw her father as a Hollywood legend, her relationship with him was far more complicated. There were no dramatic moments or public disputes, just the quiet, complicated distance that defined so much of his life. There were no public fallouts or tabloid feuds, just a quiet, growing distance that many didn't even realize was there. Part of this may have been due to Hackman's personality. He was never one for grand public gestures or emotional displays. Even in his best performances, his power came from restraint, from how he could convey so much with so little. This same energy carried into his personal life. He wasn't a man who wore his heart on his sleeve, and that sometimes made him difficult to connect with. But it wasn't just his personality at play. Hollywood itself has a way of creating distance. The long hours, constant travel, and relentless demands of the industry can pull people away from their families, even when they don't intend for it to happen. Hackman spent decades at the top of his game, moving from one film to the next, fully immersed in his craft. While he was building his legendary career, his role as a father became increasingly complicated. By the time he left Hollywood, his children were grown, and he had remarried, settling into a quieter life with Betsy Arakawa. It was a life far removed from the flashing lights and fast-paced world he had once known. But this separation also meant that the distance between him and his daughter remained largely unresolved. When Hackman passed away, Elizabeth Jean Hackman revealed something that took many by surprise. She hadn't spoken to her father in months. The statement felt heavy, not because of any obvious tension, but because of what it implied. There were no public signs of animosity between them, no dramatic estrangements. But sometimes distance isn't about conflict, it just happens. And sometimes it lingers until it's too late to repair. For those who had always wondered about Hackman's private life, Elizabeth's words painted a picture of a man who was just as elusive in death as he had been in life. He had spent years keeping the world at arm's length, and in many ways, that distance extended even to those closest to him. But what exactly had kept them apart? And what did Elizabeth know about her father's final days that the rest of the world didn't? As the investigation into his death continued, her words took on new significance. The mystery of Jean Hackman's life was far from over, and the truth behind it was still unfolding. The truth about Jean Hackman's final days was just beginning to surface. In the days following his death, the questions only seemed to multiply. The initial reports had been vague. Both Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, were found unresponsive in their Santa Fe home. There were no signs of foul play, no obvious injuries, and no immediate explanation for what had happened. At 94, Hackman's passing wasn't entirely unexpected, but the fact that both he and his wife, along with their dog, had died at the same time made the situation far more complicated. Early speculation pointed to carbon monoxide poisoning. If there had been a leak in their home, it might explain why neither of them could call for help. However, when investigators arrived, they found no evidence of a gas leak, malfunctioning furnace, or broken appliances. Nothing that would clearly point to an accident of that kind. This left authorities with a mystery on their hands. If it wasn't carbon monoxide, then what had happened? Could it have been a medical emergency that affected both of them simultaneously? Had they unknowingly been exposed to something else? Or was there another factor, something no one had considered yet? As officials continued their investigation, more details about Hackman's final days began to emerge. Those who had seen him recently said he had been in good spirits. He was still physically active, often spotted riding his bike around Santa Fe. While his age had slowed him down, there were no reports of serious health issues that could explain what had happened. The same was true for Betsy. At 61, she was significantly younger than Hackman and had been in good health. Whatever had caused their deaths, it didn't seem like something that had been building over time. It was sudden, unexpected, and, for now, unexplained. As the world processed the loss of one of Hollywood's greatest actors, those closest to him were left searching for answers. Hackman's daughter, Elizabeth Jean Hackman, had already revealed that she hadn't spoken to her father in months. Now her words carried even more weight. Had he been dealing with something privately? Were there signs that no one had noticed? For decades, Jean Hackman had been a master at keeping his personal life out of the public eye. Even in death, it seemed that mystery still surrounded him. His absence from Hollywood had pushed him into near-total obscurity, but now the circumstances of his passing had brought attention back to his name. The more people learned, the more unsettling the situation became. As the investigation continued, authorities focused on the few clues they had. Toxicology tests were underway, but the results would take time. Until then, speculation continued with no clear answers in sight. Jean Hackman had spent his life creating unforgettable characters, men defined by their strength, intelligence, and often their secrets. Now in his final chapter, it seemed he had left behind one last mystery, a mystery that even his daughter was only beginning to understand. For years, Jean Hackman had lived a life of near-total privacy. While other Hollywood legends occasionally reappeared for interviews or public appearances, he stayed firmly out of the spotlight. No film festivals, no award show cameos, no memoirs filled with behind-the-scenes stories. His life was his own, and he had no interest in changing that. However, those who paid attention noticed something different in his last few years. The once active actor, often seen biking around Santa Fe into his 90s, was spotted less and less. The occasional paparazzi photos, usually showing him running errands or grabbing a meal, became rarer. Those who knew Hackman personally described him as independent, but also increasingly withdrawn. While he had always been private, this felt different. Conversations grew shorter. Invitations were politely declined. Nothing dramatic, just a gradual retreat from the world. For someone who had already distanced himself from Hollywood, the change might not have been obvious to outsiders, but to those who had been part of his life, family, friends, or even neighbors, there were signs that something was shifting. Some believed it was simply age. After all, Hackman was 94, and perhaps he was just slowing down, choosing to spend more time at home with Betsy. Others wondered if there was something more at play. Had he been quietly dealing with an illness? Had he and Betsy been facing something together in private? There was no public record of any major health concerns or reports of hospital visits, but Hackman had always been a private person, never one to share personal details with the outside world. If something had been wrong, it was entirely possible that he kept it hidden. Then there was the matter of his daughter. When Elizabeth Jean Hackman revealed that she hadn't spoken to her father in months, it raised an unsettling question. Was that just the natural result of their already distant relationship? Or had something in his final months made him even harder to reach? It was a detail that lingered in people's minds. Hackman had always been elusive, but now even those closest to him seemed to have been left in the dark. As the investigation into his death continued, authorities worked to piece together the timeline of his final days. Had there been visitors, phone calls, or any signs of distress that might explain what had happened? For now, there were more questions than answers. But one thing was certain. Whatever had been going on behind the closed doors of Hackman's Santa Fe home, the world was just beginning to understand it. For days, the world speculated about Jean Hackman's death. The lack of clear answers only deepened the mystery. Investigators looked for signs of foul play, but nothing pointed in that direction. If it wasn't a crime and it wasn't natural causes, then what could it be? Then Jean Hackman's daughter shocked the world with what she revealed. For the first time since his passing, she spoke publicly and confirmed the family's worst fear. Her father and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, had likely died from carbon monoxide poisoning. While authorities hadn't officially confirmed this, Elizabeth said there was no other explanation that made sense. A slow, silent leak of undetectable gas had crept through their home, taking them in their sleep. "This is terrible," she admitted. They didn't even know it was happening. But that wasn't all she shared. For years, Jean Hackman had remained a mystery, even to those closest to him. His distance wasn't just about privacy, it was about something deeper, something he had never fully revealed. Elizabeth shared that her father lived with an overwhelming fear in his later years, not of death or illness, but of being forgotten. The man who had built an untouchable legacy in Hollywood had slowly come to believe that none of it mattered, that time would erase his name just as it had done to so many before him. He told me once, she said, "They'll remember the movies, but they won't remember me." That was the shocking truth about Jean Hackman. Beneath his legendary career and the strong, fearless characters he portrayed was a man who quietly feared that one day the world would simply move on without him. And in some ways, that's exactly what happened. He had left Hollywood on his own terms, but in doing so, he faded from public consciousness. The industry that once revered him barely spoke his name anymore. Elizabeth's words struck hard for fans. To them, Jean Hackman was an immortal figure, an actor whose work would last forever. But for him, the reality was different. In his final years, he believed he was disappearing piece by piece. And then, ironically, his death made the world remember him again. "He deserved more," Elizabeth said. "I just hope he knew that." The shocking truths Elizabeth revealed weren't about scandal or controversy. They were about something far more human. A man who had given so much to the world, yet spent his final years wondering if it had ever been enough. In the end, the mystery of Jean Hackman wasn't about how he died, but how he felt before he did. And now, thanks to his daughter's words, the world finally understood the truth. If one of Hollywood's greatest legends could fear being forgotten, what does that say about how we remember those who shape our world?